Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is Donovan, my awesome co-host. And today we have a special guest. Stephanie Raffelock is a blogger, speaker, and the author of two books, the newest, which is Creatrix Rising, Unlocking the Power of Midlife Women. So please welcome Stephanie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, awesome. So, wow, two books, and it sounds like you're really passionate about this topic. Do you want to tell us a little more about your story and what led you to doing what you're doing?
Well, I started writing about aging several years ago, probably because I was aging. And something shifts culturally for a woman when she gets out of her 50s and into her 60s. And there's often a feeling of insignificance or irrelevance. And as I was writing, I began to meet other people through blogs that felt the way that I did, which is life is meant to be vibrant and it's for living, it's for being alive and in the moment and in the passion. And so I wanted to explore how it is that we see ourselves as women, how that's differently than men see themselves as they age, and how we see other women as they age and how we might better support each other. So that's what got me into this initially. And then three things happened in a very short period of time that made me realize I was onto something. The first was the Women's March of 2017, which was such a great unifying moment for women of all ages. And I've been a feminist for a long, long time, but I looked around me that day and I saw daughters and granddaughters and fathers and sons and all these people marching together with a single purpose. And it moved me. I went, there's something happening here. There's a shift that's happening with women. The very next year, 2018, in the midterms, more women over the age of 50 ran for local, state, and national office than ever before in our country's history. And then the third thing that happened was #MeToo. Suddenly, women of generations were unburdened from this dirty little secret, and the world had perceptibly shifted. Women had shifted. So now I'm very interested in what women are doing with this midlife creativity, and thus the book Creatrix Rising. Creatrix is my name to replace the archetype of crone. It means a woman who makes things. And I think that that's what midlife women are becoming, women who make things.
I love this. Yes. No, as I was actually at the Women's March in 2017 in DC, because I happened in Maryland at the time, which I had never really attended a protest in my life. And it was jam-packed, packed like sardines. Yeah. It was incredible, but everyone was so courteous and polite. It didn't seem like I had to worry about my safety in that, even though there was some pushing and shoving because, sardines, everyone was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna very, very nice about it. My only negative thing that happened was that it took forever to get to the bathroom.
Right.
I was just like,
crowds are like that.
Blocks away would take at least a half hour to walk to. Just yeah. But no, an amazing experience. And I agree, the Me Too movement has, I think, helped people find their voice in all the suffering that they've experienced. And it's great. It's great that women are kind of taking their power back, and especially after 60 or after 50, to know that, you're not insignificant anymore, that you could make a difference. So really, really inspiring stuff for sure. And I don't know if I had a question in there. I just was excited about what you said. So maybe Donovan could lead off the first question.
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit. I think there's a bunch of different topics that we can explore, and I'm going to do my best to walk them, since it seems like it's going to be a women-focused conversation. But I think the first entry point that'll be nice is you mentioned sort of different ways that aging impacts men and women, and sort of the arc of just the different ways that people end up feeling. I would love, as a starting point, to kind of go into that a little bit more, and then as we go, I'm sure I'll come up with some other angles to poke around at.
Well, let's talk about archetypes for a moment, because if you're a man, you have archetypes that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. When you get older, the archetypes of an older man would be something like sage or wizard. You go from a warrior phase to a wizard or sage phase. And those are positive words. But the word that women had for aging was crone, which is not a positive word. That word entered the lexicon in the 1300s, and it means disagreeable old woman. And it was meant as an insult. So this idea that there's a new archetype emerging for us to embrace that has some positive connotations, like the male archetypes of sage and wizard, I think is quite appropriate at this time in history. And I think it's a very exciting time in history. Plus, I think it's an exciting time to be a feminist in history at this point, because men are no longer on the outside. It's not an us and them kind of thing as it was in the 70s, when my generation was wearing pinstripe suits with big shoulder pads, looking like misshapen linebackers. And, there was no rule book for it. It's like, we thought we had to be like men to be in business. And now we're finding out that we just have to be more like women to be in business, and that we have our own kind of power, that male power and female power are often very, very different. But I think that there's more of I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, is synchronicity between men and women now than there was when I was in my 20s. I think that men are much more open and accepting and welcoming of a woman's point of view, and then consequently women can return that as well. So it's not meant to be anything divisive at all. But that's what makes it exciting to me to be a feminist in this particular time, to see the change, not just for women but for men too.
Yeah, I actually I had a good male friend. Actually, I have a lot of male friends, and I was having a really good conversation one day, maybe a couple years ago, and he didn't understand what feminism is, because in his mind it was like, oh, it's women that hate men, and that's not the reality. It took his wife to kind of educate and inform him. It's not that we don't hate. I mean, there on any type of spectrum, there's always the extremists that might there, but that's not the majority, I would say. And it's just like wanting partnership and fighting for equal rights, and not saying that you have to be like a woman or that women are better or anything like that. It's just like, hey, let's have some equal opportunities here.
Right.
And we can make a difference. So I would love for you to like maybe elaborate a little further on helping men understand, the difference and maybe their perception of what feminism is.
Well, like you say, I think that on either end of things, you can find extremes.
Of course. Yeah.
But what feminism means to me is it means equal opportunity for education, for jobs. It means equal pay for equal work. And it means equal respect. In my mother's generation, I can remember my mother complaining about guys that hit on her at work. It was just totally inappropriate.
Yeah.
And there was that in my generation too, in my younger years. But I feel like that's kind of receding a bit. I think that men are much more sensitive to that. And I think that this younger generation now, anywhere from like, I don't know, maybe 30 backwards, they're a very welcoming, inclusive, tolerant, wonderful generation. It gives me great hope for our future. But I think that some of that has bled over into men even of my generation, that, even my husband, we're both 70. And there's just a more of an inclusiveness. I mean, he would just never dream of saying, well, your opinion doesn't matter to me. I mean, he asks me about everything, and we do things in a partnership kind of way. And I think that because of that, the world is a healthier place when men and women are in partnership as opposed to in competition.
Right. Mm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And going on some of the topics you've already brought up, I'd be curious how you think about, like, it sounds like things have changed for the better in some ways. But I would imagine not everyone's mind has shifted in the same ways. I would guess that's some of the stuff that's included in your book. But I'd be curious what information you think people need to know, or what they can do to help them sort of adjust to this, or open their eyes to it. Or I'm going to stop rambling and let you fill in the gaps here.
Oh, you're a good rambler. You're a good rambler. I don't know that I have an answer to, like, here's something that will open your eyes. I think that we live in a time where people need to share their stories. Men have shared their stories for a long, long time. In fact, the great literary canon, women weren't added to that until the early, like 1990s. I think 1994 maybe was when we added the first 3 or 4 women to the great literary canon. So women need to tell their story, and in telling their story, self-knowledge is revealed to us. And self-knowledge not only revealed to us, but self-knowledge reveals all things. So I just think that we need to tell our stories more and have men listen to those stories. And that's how we come together, because we bleed the same color blood. We breathe the same air. So while there are differences, there's way, way too much that's the same in us for us to ever be at odds. And I think it grows out of the power of storytelling. There's a great power in knowing who you are. And I mean, it seems like it should be so obvious, right? Who you are. But a lot of us don't take the time that we need to contemplate the deeper questions of who am I now and who do I want to be? And I think that those 2 questions have to stay with us our entire life for us to grow psychologically and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
That's my ramble.
Yeah, I totally concur with that, in that, I actually had a event when I was in DC where it was just actually having a conversation around masculinity, and not to say like men are better, women are better, or anyone. It's just to like create understanding, because I realized as a woman, there's a lot of things that men experience that I had no idea, because I'm not a man. And it just never occurred to me. And it was just like, I think it should go both ways, because there's a lot of experience, like women, like I don't know any woman that has never been sexually harassed in their life. That's just part of being a woman, I guess, to some degree.
Well, and yet I think that men come with their own set of stresses
Mm-hmm.
and to
Definitely.
be a certain way, to live up to a certain standard that is more cultural than it is personal. Oftentimes. And so you're right. Those were things that never occurred to me as I was struggling to find my voice, that are much more prevalent now, is that, guys come with their own issues the way that we do.
Yeah.
I kind of want to hone in a little bit more on this idea of sort of finding your voice, because I think it's something that it sounds like you are very comfortable with, or at least have done the work around and are willing to talk about and whatnot. I don't think that's common for a lot of people at any age. So I'd be curious what some of that process was for you, or what some of the points are that you think like can help people sort of start developing that sense.
Well, and to get vulnerable for a moment, I was a pretty troubled, confused kid. And I started writing because writing helped me make sense of the world. And the same is true of, this kind of podcast thing that I've been on the last few years, where I do a lot of guest podcasts, is that the more I do it, the more I learn my own story, the more comfortable I get with my own voice. I think it's an ongoing process. One of the things that is in our culture right now that I'm not crazy about is the word woke. Not that I don't like the idea of awakening, but woke is kind of a past tense thing. And I don't think that you wake up one day and then that's it. You don't find your voice one day and that's it. I think it's an ongoing, evolving process all the time. And I think that gives us some breathing space too, of like, oh, I'm not going to be perfect today, and I don't ever have to be perfect, because growing into a mature human being, finding one's voice, finding one's purpose, these are ongoing things, hopefully for the rest of one's life.
I think that's a really good point to bring up, because there's an idea that I see a lot, which is, oh, at some point in the future, I'm going to have everything figured out. And this is what I thought for a long time when I was younger. Like, okay, by the time I'm 20, I'll really know how the world works. Then 20 came around and I was like, oh, I have no idea what's happening. And, the same thing like year after year. So I think it's important and a nice perspective to get to recognize that it's never really this this, I don't know, puzzle that finally fits together perfectly and stays that way for the rest of forever. Even though it sounds nice, that'd be really great if things just fell together and stayed that way permanently.
I love
But
it. You said this.
Mm-hmm.
I love it that you said this, because it's like, I'm laughing because it's like, absolutely. When I was 20 or 30 years old, it's like, okay, I got this wired now. Okay, I think I have this wired now. And it's like every year would go on and it was never quite wired. You never quite get it. And I think that's fine. I don't think that you're supposed to. I think that life would get very dull and very flat and very smooth and untextured. And I think what textures our heart, what gives us compassion, what gives us the ability to know suffering and joy in the same space, is this idea that we are still evolving all of the time. I did a show with someone recently. We talked about reinvention, and she wanted to know how I'd reinvented myself. And I said to her, well, which time? Life is all about reinventing and reimagining. And, certainly at 12 years old, I reinvented myself to who I was going to be at 15. And at 15, I reinvented myself for the next phase, and on it goes. And that's just something that I think is the gift that we give ourselves, because reinvention to me does mean awakening, but not woke, because woke is past tense. Like, you have it wired, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd be curious, because I agree in that we're all kind of like on this ongoing journey, and it never really ends. We don't just arrive at this magical place and life is perfect thereafter. But what happens when you enter like midlife to stay curious and engaged in creating? Or do you feel like there's a journey in that, like you have more baggage and history and that makes it harder? Or I don't know, what do you hear from most people, I guess?
I think that people deal with, wounding, their childhood wounds their whole life. I don't believe there's an all the way healed kind of position. I think that the healing comes from working with whatever lot you have in life. But you use 3 words. I'm going to try to remember them: engaged, creativity. What was the other one? Oh,
I don't know.
Anyway, curiosity.
Yeah. Yes.
I think you should write those 3 notes, those 3 words on a Post-it note, and leave it someplace where you see it all the time. Are you engaged in the world? What a great question to ask yourself every day. Am I engaged? Where can I engage today? How can I be creative today? How can my life have purpose? And creativity is a big, big piece in all of this. I read Julia Cameron's book, reread her book recently, The Artist's Way. The book is about 25 years old, but it really is about creativity. Now, she speaks to the writer, but it really works for all modes of creativity. And I think one of the great gifts we give ourselves as we get older is to continue to create. I started painting rocks this year, which is my funny little thing, and it makes me laugh just to even say it. But around my neighborhood, when we went into lockdown with the pandemic, I still walked every day with my husband, and we found these rocks everywhere, and also sidewalk drawings from the kids in our neighborhood. And the sidewalk drawings would say things like, there'd be a rainbow and they'd say, skip here for happiness, or keep the faith, or there'd just be a big thing that said love. And then we noticed that all these little rocks were painted, and there'd be pictures of mountains, or there'd be pictures of hearts, or pictures of cats or something. And they just started appearing like around trees and in people's gardens and stuff. And I heard about this thing called story stones. It's a real thing. And it comes from the Aborigine tribes in Australia. And the storytelling tradition there is oral. So to memorize a story, you have to find a method to help you, retain it. So the elder would sit with the youngster, and every time you remembered the first part of a story, they would give you a stone. And then when you remembered the second part of the story, they would give you another stone. And then that was your little bag of rocks, and those were story stones. Then I thought of these kids painting the rocks in my neighborhood. And I thought, well, those are story stones too. And I love, there's something about that word that I absolutely love. And I love that these kids in the midst of a pandemic created something from their young lives that they gave to their community. And I was so curious to find out, when I talked to people in Oregon, when I talked to people on the East Coast, that this was not unique to my area. There were kids painting these rocks and doing these sidewalk drawings, maybe because they were home more. I don't know. But it was just an amazing little phenomenon. I forgot how we got on that, but it's a good story.
Yeah. Actually, I have a good friend that does it too, and I thought it was a little quirky and weird, but if it brings you joy, I'm like, go for it. And yeah, I mean, I think it would be nice if you stumbled upon a painted rock, and you just wonder what's the story behind that.
Well, I know what it was. We were talking about creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
you know how it just really went off on a tangent there. But creativity can be anything. It can be painting rocks. It can be your garden. It can be cooking. It can be writing. It can be art. It can be so many things. Knitting. There's just so many ways to create, to be that woman, that creatrix that makes things, to be that wizard, that alchemist that makes things. And there's something that feels sacred about that to me. It almost doesn't matter what it is. It's just it's creation, modeling creation. It's kind of the microcosm of the macrocosm, creatively.
What do you think is or are some of the blockers that stop people in that stage from creating? Because in my own life, I see kind of two versions of the same person in the same stage of life, and one is really engaging in doing stuff like that, and the other is just constantly bemoaning, like, oh, I'm getting old, I can't do anything, I can't do this, oh, I don't want to pick that up, I'm too old to do this, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think is some of the differences or like blockers between the two paths there?
I think a lot of it has to do with the way we talk to ourselves, and that's something that can be learned. That's something that can be learned or relearned. We can fall into really bad habits going, oh, I'm too old to do that. I went kayaking this morning. There's a lake just a few minutes from me, and I go every Thursday morning. And one of the women I kayak with is 78 years old. And she said, oh, I'm always so glad when you ask me to kayak with you, because she said a lot of my friends just don't do stuff now. Mm-hmm. And so this is a woman that is engaged, to return to what you were saying. Alice, she's engaged, she's curious, she's creative, and there's something that's wonderful for her about being out on the lake. There's something that's wonderful for me, but I think it has to do with the way we talk to ourselves. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't tell herself that story, of I'm too old. She tells herself the story of what can I get up and do today? What's going to get me excited about life today? So I think it comes down to that. It's interesting. You have a podcast. It's Happy Talk?
Yes, Happy Talks.
So, Happy Talk. So I love that. So some of the way we talk to each other isn't that happy. Some of the way we talk to ourselves isn't that happy. And right now we're living through a very, very difficult time. And, not only is it like a 24/7 news cycle, but, you can't go on social media without seeing news. You can't talk to people without hearing about news. And a lot of it isn't good. So what does that do to how we talk about ourselves and how we think about ourselves? My life has more than a political component to it. It has more to do than me fighting for something that I believe in. It also has to do with taking the time to be curious about nature and immerse myself in the experience. Joseph Campbell has a great line. He said, we all think that we want meaning in life. We want to know what it means. But he said, really what we want is the rapture of the experience. And so somewhere on those two sides is that line that says, are you going to go for purpose and the rapture of the experience and vibrancy, or are you going to whine? Because it's easy to whine as you get older. Believe me, connective tissue isn't what it used to be. Your joints get a little arthritic. And sometimes I wake up in the morning and I have some aches, but I know that once I'm out on the trail and I'm walking a little bit, that subsides. So to know that trick is a good one. It's like, you're not going to be in this state all day. Get out and move. Keep it moving should be everybody's mantra as they get older.
Yeah, totally. I think our self-talk absolutely impacts, our ability to take action, like walking. And I just realized in this conversation that, I'm guilty, even though I haven't quite hit 40 yet. I'm guilty of saying I'm old sometimes when I get achy joints and things. And I'm like, oh, I really need to stop that, because something that I reflected on a little while ago was just like, if you catch yourself saying I'm old, or you're just wishing and reminiscing about how you were younger and more vibrant and energetic. And then when I thought about it, I was like, oh, 20 years from now, I might be reminiscing about where I am right now. So I should really enjoy the present moment as is, because, I'll never be in this exact same moment ever again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just have to make the most of each moment of life and know that life changes. I mean, how we were at 5 isn't how we were at 15 or 35 or 45 or 55.
Right.
And so I know that it seems daunting, but maybe it seems daunting because we fear mortality. And, we're not quite yet ready to recede from life. Yet when we talk to ourselves like, oh God, I just feel so old, that is a kind of recession from the vibrancy of life. It is a kind of recession from the significance of life. So if you can stay positive, and I think one of the ways you stay positive, and you were talking about this, Donovan, what can you do? And I said, I really don't know, but I do know something you can do. And that is to stay grateful, to stay appreciative of the world. I always feel so much better when I'm grateful, not only grateful within myself quietly, but when I express gratitude to other people. Right now during these difficult times, it's like I keep hearing how short-staffed everybody is. So it's like if you can extend kindness and gratitude to that person behind the counter that's checking out your groceries, you're going to feel better and they're going to feel better. And then that little drop makes the world a better place, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And there's tons of studies to back that up too. Like a gratitude practice is one of the most strongest tools that you can use to increase your quality of life. On that same sort of note, I would be curious if you have any practices that you do for a gratitude practice, like to cultivate intentionally, or if it's just something that kind of comes to you more naturally.
I don't know that I have formal practices. I mean, I was a meditator for a long time, and now I get up and I write, and it takes the same amount of energy and focus to sit down and complete 1,000 words as it does to sit on a cushion and meditate. It's just a focusing of energy. So it's something that allows me to get calm and centered. As far as a formal gratitude practice, I do have this habit, and I don't think it's a practice. I just think it's a habit that I've had since I was 17, is that when I wake up in the morning, I say, thank you, God, for my day. Thank you for this life. And I've been saying that since I was 17, not because I came up with it, because I had a girlfriend who told me that her mother did that every morning. And I was absolutely intrigued by that, what it would be like to start your day. So somehow climbing out of the fog that I often climb out of to wake up in the morning, that's my first thought, is to say thank you for my life and for this day.
Yeah. I think that's great.
I think it could definitely make a difference, because it creates the context of your day, and you're starting your day with gratitude, and it creates oh, what do I get to live for today? I did have another thought, when we were talking before about vibrancy and energy, which I think a lot of people associate with being young and youthful and super active and hiking and snowboarding and mountain biking, really active things, which I get our physical bodies might not be able to do in our 60s, or maybe they can. It depends. Each individual is different. But I think there is a way to be vibrant without having to remove that association that being vibrant means I'm super active, even though that could hurt yourself potentially. So how does someone create that vibrancy without necessarily being I'm gonna climb Mount Everest kind of a thing?
I think you just have to be unafraid to be passionate about your life, whatever it is. Be passionate about your gardening. Be passionate about your knitting. It's a quality that when we see it in someone else, we're usually entranced by it. We usually love that in someone else. And we should love it that much in ourselves as well. I think that that's vibrancy, because you're right. I no longer ski. I don't run anymore. But I also think that adaptability has to come with vibrancy. Yeah. It's just because you can't run anymore doesn't mean that you can't brisk walk. Just because you can't snowboard anymore doesn't mean that you can't snowshoe. You can do Pilates, you can swim. I mean, we're constantly adapting. And so adaptability is part of that. But it also comes back to that self-talk, what are you willing to try? I think that part of the, it's interesting as I'm talking, I'm thinking that part of that vibrancy is the curiosity for life, is the gratitude for life, that it isn't just physical activity, that there's also this kind of psychological or spiritual activity that goes on when we're feeling grateful, when we're feeling excited about something that might not involve physical activity at all. Writing is hardly a physical activity, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it brought to mind, just as you were talking about some of the physical activities and stuff, there have been times where I go out on, sort of longer hikes for me. And I've noticed on a lot of those, like there are people in their 60s and 70s absolutely just crushing me, like leaving me in the dust. And I'm sure it's just because, like you're saying, that's the activity they've chose to engage in. They're not limited at all physically in that domain. Where they might be by their mindset, they're not. And they're still completely capable of doing those things. So it's just, it's going back to kind of the self-talk. I'm always blown away. And when I'm just like, whoa, this man, woman, whatever, is just absolutely just blowing me away. And I'm sure if I met them in town, they'd be like, oh, you're young, you can do whatever, blah, 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 blah. No, they're in way better shape than I am and absolutely capable of doing everything. So, yeah, it just goes back to, I also think even within that, and I'm sure it depends on who you are individually and what you've gone through, but even in the physical domain, like there are still so many options for a lot of people if they are willing to be engaged, like you were saying. And I also think going back to kind of those two different types of people that I've ended up seeing, I think that is the difference, is whether or not they found a way to stay curious and engaged and active in whatever it is that they happen to enjoy.
And to choose it, to choose it and to own it. But that's not just a dilemma, I think, of older age. I think that's a dilemma of life in general. In my 40s, I knew those people that were dour, the kind of Eeyore the donkey type people that always had like a little gray rain cloud over their head. And then I knew people that chose something that was much more positive for themselves. So I think it comes down to choice, and it's not just the age. It can happen at any age. It's just, I think it's more underscored as you get older, because older becomes an excuse more so than when you're in your 30s or 40s.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I can see how there are people in our younger generation, where they spend their days just watching TV and on social media and playing video games. And it's like, for some that might bring them vibrancy in life, and for others that might be depleting. I know if I just did that every day, all day long, I would just feel like kind of drained and not so vibrant, I would suspect. But
it's just so easy to zone out.
It is, yeah.
You've got a screen in front of you, it's just so easy to zone out, and then you kind of numb out. You don't really feel life. Like, what does my body feel like right now? What's going on in my mind? What's going on in my heart? So it's just too easy to zone out. I mean, I like my devices too, but
yeah, I'm
not in love with them.
Yeah, it is good to put them away every now and then. Yeah, great. Well, yeah, Donovan, did you have any other questions?
Yeah, there was one other thing I wanted to touch on, which is we've talked about self-talk a couple times, and I would be curious if you have any strategies or ideas for, let's say that I have this sort of self-talk that comes in and like, oh, I want to go do this thing. Oh, no, I probably shouldn't, et cetera, et cetera. Any strategies or ideas for how to start working against some of the negative self-talk if I'm able to identify it?
I think it's really important with negative self-talk to be very, very gentle with oneself. A lot of self-talk, negative self-talks, comes from a sense of poor self-worth or feeling that somehow we're not enough. And so I think that the first thing that has to happen is we have to be very gentle with ourselves, and that it does not have to be complicated. It can be something as simple as, you're okay. You're okay. It doesn't have to be any more than that. And that's where you begin. And then you can get creative with it and say, what great thing am I going to do today? You can get as expansive with it as you want, or you can keep it simple. But I think you have to start out really gentle. That would be the one strategy I would offer, to just say, you're okay. I love me. I'm okay.
Yeah, I think that's great because I think a lot of people treat themselves much, much worse than they allow anyone around them to be treated.
Right. We would never treat a friend like that. And yet we will treat ourselves like that. So if you can become aware of negative self-talk and gently pull yourself out of it a little bit, right on.
Yes, we could all be kinder, more compassionate towards ourselves. I agree. Great. Well, Stephanie, it's been such a pleasure having you on our show. Was there anything you'd like to plug before we wrap up today?
Oh, I always have a plug, but here,
yeah, share with us.
You can see this, or it's going to be backwards on Zoom, but this is my book, Creatrix Rising. Mm-hmm. It launches August 24th. Creatrix Rising, Unlocking the Power of Midlife Women is a series of personal stories and essays about my own voice, finding my own voice and my own confidence in the world, my feminist history, and the feminist history of some of the women around me that helped me, because we don't do anything in this life without helpers. And it's meant to inspire and empower you to know your own story and to embrace your years, regardless of what the number is.
Yes, I love it. Great. Well, yes, everyone, you can check that out in the link in the description below. And Stephanie, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.